Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? It helps us make quality content for you. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
The air smelled like fresh cedar and wet grass as I drove the final nail into the last plank of my new fence. The sun was warm on my back and the rhythmic tapping of the hammer was the only sound for miles. My yard finally looked perfect after months of planning, saving, measuring, and arguing with contractors. I had done it myself. All 12 panels straight as a rifle line, clean, strong, and right on the boundary line, the one I paid good money to confirm. I stepped back to admire the work, wiping sweat from my brow when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a car door slamming hard, followed by heels on gravel. Then the voice sharp and jagged like broken glass. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I turned slowly, already knowing who it was. Karen, my new neighbor with the perpetual scowl and the 1,000 complaints. She marched toward me, waving a folded piece of paper like it was a badge, and she was the sheriff. "You've put your ugly little fence on my property," she barked, planting herself 3 feet from me, her perfume an overpowering mix of artificial lavender and judgment. I blinked once, then twice, trying to stay calm. This wasn't the first time Karen had complained since moving in. 6 months ago she had called the city on me for a tree that was too tall, music that was too loud which was just classical at a reasonable volume, and once she left a note on my door, claiming my porch light was an act of light pollution. "This fence is on my side," she insisted, waving the paper so close to my face I could smell the toner. I looked down at the document. It was a blurry printout of a satellite image from Google Maps with a red line drawn across it in highlighter. "I had the property surveyed," I said slowly, gesturing to the small orange flag still stuck in the grass. "I can show you the documents if you'd like," Karen scoffed and crossed her arms. "Those little flags mean nothing. I know my rights, and I know where my land begins," I exhaled, trying to keep my voice even. I hired a licensed surveyor. The results were filed with the county. "This fence is 2 inches inside my boundary." Karen leaned in, narrowing her eyes, her lips curling into something between a grin and a snarl. "We'll see what the HOA has to say about that." She spun on her heel and stomped back to her car. The tires screeched as she peeled out of the driveway, kicking up gravel onto my lawn. That night the floodlights came on like stadium lights, blinding my living room. The beams pointed directly into my windows. I lowered the blinds and tried to sleep, but I could feel the heat of her spite even through the walls. The next morning a piece of plywood leaned against my fence with sloppy red spray paint reading, "Remove your garbage from my land or I will..." I took a picture, then carefully moved it back onto her lawn where it came from. I tried to laugh it off, but my stomach was tight. My hands kept shaking every time I looked at the fence I had built with pride. I felt like it was a loaded gun just waiting to go off. By the end of the week she had escalated from notes to garbage black trash bags filled with who knows what lined up neatly along the fence like a row of stink bombs. Her dog barked endlessly, digging little trenches under the panels. I could see dirt sprayed onto my side, clumps of it like insults hurled over an invisible line. I went over one evening, trying again to be reasonable. I held out the official survey papers and said I was happy to explain it in detail. She didn't even look at the pages, just sneered and said, "You don't belong here, your kind never stays long." I froze. "My kind," I repeated, not sure if I was angrier at the insult or the implication. "You think you're smarter than everyone building your precious little fence? Well, guess what? It won't last." She turned and walked away, laughing like she had already won. I stood there for a long time under the dim light of my porch, one hand gripping the survey, one hand clenched at my side, the weight of the paper like a useless shield. The next day I noticed the paint. It wasn't subtle this time. 3 feet tall, bright red letters scrawled across the cedar panels. "Trespasser." The paint dripped like blood, soaking into the wood, ruining hours of work and the pride that came with it. I stared at it for a full minute, breathing in through my nose and out through my teeth, trying not to scream. The neighborhood was quiet, eerily, so not a soul in sight, as if everyone was watching from behind curtains. I took out my phone, took photos, then videos, then walked back to the shed, opened a drawer and pulled out the file marked "Property Survey." Tucked inside were the documents, receipts, time-stamped photos, every legal bit of proof I had. If she wanted a war, she had one. and she didn't even see it coming. The letter came in a plain white envelope with the HOA logo stamped in the corner and a thin red border along the edge like a warning label. It arrived 3 days after the graffiti. The timing was no coincidence. Inside the letter were 3 paragraphs written in vague officious language, suggesting that my fence had become a point of concern, and that until the matter was resolved, I should cease all structural changes on or near the property line. It said a neighbor had filed a complaint, and that photographic evidence had been provided. I didn't need to guess who submitted it. I attended the next HOA meeting, held in a stale room above the local community center. Karen arrived in heels that clicked like gunshots with a stack of papers in one hand and a smug smile glued to her face. She nodded to a few board members like they were old friends, which unnerved me. When it was her turn, she pulled out enlarged printouts of aerial images from Google Earth, holding them up like courtroom exhibits. Her voice was syrupy at first, then rising to a theatrical pitch as she described the invasion of her property and the emotional distress caused by the presence of my fence. I waited patiently until they called on me and then laid out the survey, the official markers, the timestamps, the receipts, and offered to have the licensed surveyor testify if needed. Karen interrupted, constantly calling my documents fake, saying I forged them, and calling the surveyor a scam artist in front of everyone. Some board members frowned, but no one stopped her, and the chairperson finally asked me to step down so they could deliberate. In the end, the HOA decided to delay their judgment. They claimed they needed time to review both parties' evidence and reminded me again not to alter anything near the fence line until then. Karen left first with a grin wide enough to split her face. I walked out second, feeling like I had just stepped in something rotten. By the end of the week, I noticed a change in the neighborhood. People who used to wave no longer made eye contact. Some crossed the street to avoid walking past my house. Others posted cryptic comments in the neighborhood Facebook group about aggressive neighbors and disrespecting property lines. Karen was online too, posting under her name, calling me a dangerous man, a liar, a thief, and tagging every post with screenshots of the fence and poorly edited photos showing my panels inches into her lawn, which was not only false but laughably bad Photoshop. But people believed her, or at least pretended to. I found myself checking the windows more often, keeping the lights off in the evenings. Every creak in the night made my heart pound. I tried to restore some peace by hiring a second surveyor. This one came recommended by a real estate attorney and cost twice as much. He arrived with equipment that looked like it belonged on a NASA mission, and confirmed what I already knew: the fence was on my land. And in fact, the boundary ran even further than I thought. He planted fresh orange flags across the line, and I took pictures from every angle. 2 days later, those flags were gone. I checked my security footage, and there it was, grainy but clear. Karen's teenage son in a hoodie sneaking into the yard at dusk, pulling up every single marker and tossing them over the fence like weeds. I brought the footage to the local police station. The officer at the desk watched silently, then handed me back my flash drive and said, "This looks like vandalism, but we can't press charges unless you catch him in the act or show damage to your property." I left the station feeling like I had swallowed a stone. The final straw came early one Saturday morning. The sound of jackhammering jolted me from sleep. I threw on a shirt and rushed outside to find a crew of workers dismantling the eastern section of the fence, tearing it down panel by panel, while Karen stood nearby holding a clipboard and smiling like she was at a garden party. I yelled over the noise, demanding to know what they were doing. She waved the same old map in the air and said, "Correcting a violation since you wouldn't do it yourself." I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. The workers paused while the officers spoke to Karen, then came to me. I showed them everything: the papers, the survey, the photos, the video of the flags. This time, they nodded and told the workers to stop. They couldn't arrest her yet, they said, but they could make her stop until the court sorted it out. Karen stood across the lawn, arms crossed, watching it all with an expression of boredom, as if she were the victim of a minor inconvenience. As the officers left, she turned to me and said in a low, even voice, "You're making this worse for yourself, you know." I didn't answer. I just watched her walk away. That night I stood under the porch light holding the survey folder, again flipping through the documents, looking for something, anything that could end this nightmare. I found an old receipt from the county records office tucked in the back, and behind it a note from the original owner who had sold me the property. It mentioned a discrepancy in the neighboring plot. Something about a mapping error during development. I read it 3 times, then looked at the most recent survey again. Lines overlapped, then diverged, then formed a gap, a 12-foot gap on the opposite side of the fence. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it meant. Karen's house was built too far onto my property by at least 12 feet. Not only was my fence legal, she had been trespassing every single day since the day she moved in, and she had no idea. The next morning I drove straight to the county records office, walking through the double doors with a mix of dread and determination. The clerk behind the desk glanced up, bored, until I slid the documents across the counter and pointed to the coordinates and parcel numbers. She tapped a few keys, frowned, then typed faster. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned toward the screen. "This isn't the first time this lot came up with problems," she said, scrolling through layers of old maps. "Looks like during the original subdivision development they made a topographic adjustment, but never updated the public plat records." She turned the monitor toward me, and there it was in black and white. Karen's house partially extended beyond her legal boundary into what was technically mine by 12 feet. My heart raced as the implications unfolded like a stack of dominoes. Her patio, her shed, even part of her driveway were sitting on my land, not just overlapping but fully encroaching. I asked for certified copies and left with them tucked tight under my arm. My mind already spinning with the possibilities. I didn't feel anger anymore. Only clarity, like a fog had lifted, and underneath it was a perfect map for revenge. I contacted a real estate attorney, who listened with one eyebrow raised, then slowly smiled when I laid out the documents and timelines. She leaned back in her chair and said, "If this holds up in court, not only are you in the clear, you could file for damages or even reclaim the land outright." I told her I wanted to do it by the book, nothing underhanded, no sudden fences or midnight bulldozers. I wanted this to unfold in front of Karen just like she had done to me, step by deliberate step. We filed a quiet title action, which is legal speak for, "Hey, this land is mine and I have proof." It took weeks of filing, signatures, and notarizations, but with every step, I felt stronger, like I was taking pieces of myself back. During that time, Karen didn't stop. She left another letter in my mailbox, this one typed in all caps and filled with threats about lawsuits and countersuits. She claimed I was stalking her, that I had hidden cameras watching her children, that I was violating her rights with my fence. I showed every letter to the attorney, who shook her head and added each one to a thickening file marked harassment. One night I returned home to find a smear of something dark and foul across my front steps. It stank like rotting meat, and there were feathers stuck to it. My stomach turned, but I didn't clean it right away. Instead, I photographed everything, then called animal control, who identified it as roadkill, likely tossed from a short distance. The police came again, and this time they filed an incident report. I could see it in their eyes. They were starting to believe me. Then the court date arrived. I wore my best suit and walked into the small courtroom with my head high. Karen was already seated, arms crossed, eyes cold. Her lawyer, a young man with too much gel and not enough folders, kept whispering to her. She didn't look at me once. My attorney presented our case with surgical precision, laying out the surveys, maps, witness statements, and the official documentation from the county records office. We showed the progression of harassment, the removal of survey flags, the defacing of property, the destruction of my fence, and then the crown jewel, the 12-foot encroachment of her property onto mine. Karen's lawyer objected, sputtered, and accused us of manipulating outdated data, but the judge silenced him with a single raised hand and leaned over the exhibits for what felt like an hour. When he finally looked up, he adjusted his glasses and spoke in a slow, measured tone. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the plaintiff's claim valid and substantiated by multiple independent sources." He paused as if savoring the next words. "The defendant's structure is encroaching upon the plaintiff's property by a margin of 12 feet, and therefore the land in question shall be officially recognized as belonging to the plaintiff." I didn't breathe as the courtroom went silent. Except for the scratching of pens, Karen turned to her lawyer, who suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but the judge was already standing. "Furthermore," he said, The plaintiff is entitled to pursue damages or negotiate a property transfer at fair market value under the court's oversight. The gavel dropped with a finality that echoed deep inside my chest. Karen shot out of her seat and followed her lawyer down the hallway in a storm of clacking heels and muttered curses. I watched her go, feeling no joy, no triumph, only the steady, quiet pulse of justice, doing what it was supposed to do. Outside the courthouse, the wind picked up cool and dry, brushing against my face like a clean slate. I stood on the steps holding the judgment papers, as if they were a sword and shield combined. I had won. Not just the fence, not just the land, but the truth. And Karen had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The week after the court ruling, Karen's silence was louder than her accusations had ever been. Her house sat still, windows, dark curtains drawn like a fortress preparing for siege. Her perfect garden began to wilt. Weeds creeping through cracks in her driveway like they knew her time was up. I hired a contractor to reinstall the fence with a fresh coat of stain. This time, the boundary markers went up with thick steel posts and high visibility tape. A crew laid down orange spray paint, where my property line now officially stood 12 feet deeper than before, and right through the middle of her patio. She watched from a second-floor window, expression unreadable, and for the first time since this all began, she did not speak. She did not protest. Then came the letter from my attorney to hers. It offered two choices. She could buy the 12 feet of land back at triple the market rate, including legal fees, or she could remove every structure that trespassed onto my property within 45 days. Her reply came fast and furious, full of caps and threats, but it held no legal weight anymore. She was bleeding and she knew it. 2 days later, I came home to find a moving truck in her driveway. Her voice was echoing across the yard, barking orders at the movers. She was leaving not just the property, but the neighborhood. Her empire of gossip and manipulation collapsing into boxes and taped up. Regrets? I stood at the edge of my lawn and watched her struggle with a rolled-up rug until it slipped from her arms and thudded against the porch. She saw me, then eyes sharp with resentment but empty of fire. "You think you've won?" She spat, the words sharp as nails. I didn't answer, just watched her mouth tighten before she turned away and slammed the door behind her. When the moving truck pulled out, neighbors emerged like animals after a storm, cautious and quiet. One by one they walked. Over offered handshakes, apologies, stories of their own run-ins with Karen, whispered confessions of siding with her out of fear, not belief. They asked how I did it, and I simply said, truth and patience. Then the part I never planned happened. A post appeared in the neighborhood Facebook group. It was a screenshot from Zillow. Karen's house, now listed with a bold disclosure in red at the bottom, stating property line, dispute resolved, encroachment, removed, sale pending legal modification. The comments exploded. Neighbors laughed, shared memes, someone even edited a photo of Karen in a Game of Thrones throne, made of broken fence panels with the caption, Queen of Bad Boundaries. The image went viral locally and even got picked up by a real state satire page the next day. A reporter from a community news blog reached out and I agreed to speak anonymously. The article painted the whole ordeal like a chess match, highlighting Karen's arrogance and my restraint. I printed a copy and framed it, hanging it in the garage above my toolbox where the old fence blueprints used to be. By the end of the month, Karen was gone. The house empty, her kingdom dismantled, the patio jackhammered to dust, the shed hauled off piece by piece until only a patch of disturbed dirt remained. In its place, I planted a small vegetable garden, the kind that needed sunlight and patience and care. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a neighbor watching from across the street, giving me a thumbs up or a quiet nod of approval. Justice had not just been served, it had been planted, watered, and left to bloom. One night, as I sat on the porch, sipping a cold drink under the warm glow of the porch light, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Mr. Halbrook, the oldest neighbor on the block who had lived through 3 HOA presidents and 4 hurricanes. He looked out over the yard, then at me, and said, "She always thought this place belonged to her." I smiled and replied, "Now it does, but to the right person." He laughed deep and slow before heading back to his house cane, tapping rhythm against the sidewalk. That was the last time I thought about Karen with any real weight. Not as a threat or a memory, just a name that once meant something, before it meant Nothing at all. And as the stars blinked into view above me and the wind rustled through the leaves of my new garden, I whispered to myself, "Let the fence stand forever."